Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so happy to have you with us today. This is the fifth episode of our webinar series, Psychological Safety in Focus. If you are listening to us for the first time, here's a bit of context. At Cosmic Center, psychological safety has been a core part of our work for many years, shaping how we design organizational assessments, leadership programs, team experiences, and even how we operate internally. It's central to our belief that teams perform at their highest when people feel safe enough to speak up, ask questions, share concerns, and learn together. Today, we're focusing on one of the four domains of psychological safety: inclusion and diversity. The psychological safety scan measures actually four key domains, inclusion and diversity being one of them, but also willingness to help, open conversations, and attitude to risk and failure. Together, these domains are captured through seven questions that participants respond to as part of the Psychological Safety Index. In this session, we'll take a deeper look at inclusion and diversity and explore what it really means in the context of psychological safety and in the context of high performing teams and how they work with each other every day. Today, I'm joined by Tala, who leads the capability development practice here at Cosmic Centers. Tala works closely with leaders from across the region to design and deliver impactful learning programs for leaders at every stage of their journey, whether they are like first time middle managers who shift from leading self to leading others, or if they are also senior leaders who go from leading teams to shaping strategy. Tala, thank you for joining me on this episode of the webinar.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be the first of the four domains.
Yeah, totally. So ideally, we'll have one for each. We'll be announcing the dates later, but today we are really only focused on inclusion and diversity. And ideally, what we would want to start with is actually making sure that we put diversity and inclusion in the right context here, because often when we present our domains of psychological safety and when we say inclusion and diversity, people confuse it with DE and I.
Yeah.
However, in the context of psych safety, it's not about demographics or fairness in representation. It's of course important, but it doesn't really talk about this concept. So I would love you, Tala, if you can first start us off by maybe telling us how inclusion and diversity is seen in the psychological safety context.
Yeah, beautiful. So as a centaur, we love a good definition. And so let's start with that. What is an inclusive team? It's one where differences coexist in a way that's mutually beneficial, but it also happens through continuous action. So I'll say it again. An inclusive team is one where differences coexist in a mutually beneficial way through continuous action. If we break it down, what I love about this definition is that it tells us that, first of all, our differences are our strength and they serve each other, right? That mutual beneficial part. And these differences can be cultural. These differences can be your acquired diversity. So, for example, you, Marie, being an engineer by trade, you have that methodical thinking. I, coming from a liberal arts world, have a bit more of a creative brain, if you will. But what I also love about the definition is that this piece on continuous action, it actually takes work. We have to be intentional about creating an inclusive environment. And we also, think of the environment as one where teams have both a high sense of belonging and have a high value for diversity. So if we see teams that are really diverse but a low sense of belonging, then that's kind of like you're differentiated. Your differences are there, but we're not reaping the benefits of how unique they are. Or if you have a high sense of belonging and low value for diversity, actually you then just create a culture of assimilation, a culture where if you're not treated like, if you're not an insider, then you're not one of us. And
Mm.
inclusion is really where you have a balance of those two, right? So your team values diversity and it has a high sense of belonging. So you feel like those differences are welcome. And what we see is also that when employees feel heard, um, the data tells us that actually we see this in performance, right? So 73% of employees are actually performing their best, or they feel they're performing their best when they feel included. You have a 75% faster new product market introductions. Like that is crazy, right? And you're 87% more likely to make a better decision. And these are just some of the statistics that tell us that when we as leaders are intentional about creating inclusive working environments where our differences are welcome and our teams know how to reap those benefits, then we see the tangible impact on organizational performance. And so that was just kind of like a little intro. We see it show up in the very practical ways through work and through training. Um, and it takes a lot of practices on the leader's part, but also in the culture that the team creates. And so, what I often do is when we work with newly promoted middle managers or first time middle managers, we actually see that um, helping them create those conditions to be an inclusive team and giving them the terms for how to share feedback, how to communicate, and how to welcome a team's diversity in that context is what we focus on. But maybe I'll pause there and see if
Yeah,
anything
perfect. Thank
resonates with you. Yeah,
you, Tala. If I want to summarize it, so when we say inclusion and diversity in the context of psychological safety, I would understand this as me as a team member. I feel, as you said, I feel heard in the team. I feel included in the day to day, meaning in very practical situation. I'm invited to the right meetings. I'm involved in the decision making when it's related to my work. If I have a different opinion, people take it into consideration. So this is the kind of inclusion that we are looking at when it comes to psych safety, right?
yeah,
And the way we nurture this in the team, as you said, like through the leadership, but also every team member actually is invited to adopt these. And we were gonna talk a bit later about what are the changes or what can we introduce in terms of practices or rituals that can help that. But to dive a bit deeper on the behaviors that make me feel included or not, sometimes people unintentionally, maybe because we work at speed, or maybe because it wasn't meant to, it happened that you were there and like I talked and I told you about
mhm,
something, but then someone who was supposed to know also wasn't in the room and ended up not knowing or maybe knowing later. And these like
yeah,
small unintentional
mhm,
acts might send a signal to someone that they are not included, might create a frustration. So, can you talk to us a bit more about how the work structure can sometimes maybe make people feel that they're excluded?
sure, yeah. Maybe I can offer like a way for us to look at it. It's an inverted pyramid model that it's adapted from work from McKinsey and BCG. And if we think about it, how do we create the environments for work? First, it's at the individual level, then it's at the team level, then the leaders have a role, and then at the top is how the organization does it. And maybe I can give an example for each. So at the individual level, it's about how we communicate with each other, right? Those explicit norms, how we can say like, oh, for example, like, um, I will be at this meeting today. I look forward to seeing you. Here's the agenda. Here's what we want to discuss. Like, these are some of the very explicit communication practices we can say where it's like, oh, Tala's coming to the meeting. Great. Tala is the only non-Arabic speaker on our team. Let's make sure we run this meeting in English to make sure she understands, right? So when we're really explicit about these things that we say like, I'm coming to the meeting. I'd love for us to keep it to the official language. That's really great, right? The next level would be at the team level. And this is where I say it's about the team norms. Can we be explicit about how we as a team engage and interact? How do we give feedback? Let's say it out loud. We as a team run retrospectives after a project, and we use that time to debrief. For example, at the team level, you can also say that we talk openly about our cultures, where we're from, and what's different. So in this part of the world, we have Ramadan coming up. Great thing to share about a team, so people understand where where we can be aware of people's differences and how we can accommodate them. At the leadership level, it's really about role modeling. So, for example, if I, as a leader, speak in Arabic primarily, but I know there's non-Arabic speakers in a team, it's on me to make sure that I'm making sure everyone is speaking in English, the shared language, right? I have to role model those actions. If I'm the one switching languages in meetings, everyone else will think that's okay. And so I have to set those norms and role model. And at the organizational level, it's about integrating it into the policies, the systems of operation. So again, running with this, language example, we need to say what the official language is. And that's how we see these things show up, because once that becomes the norm, then okay, like it can trickle down, right? The leader knows to uphold that. We don't want anyone to feel excluded. And if you are communicating in a language where everyone doesn't understand, you're creating an environment where not everyone's included, right? Um, And at the team level, it's what we say, it's our norms. And at the individual level, we're explicit about that, right? You can make a lot of assumptions about what someone knows or doesn't know. But if we say, like, I'm coming to the meeting, I'm not an Arabic speaker, it's a good way to kind of remember that. So that's kind of how we see it operating. But, there's a lot of the very basics that it comes down to, like, um, when we prioritize for efficiency over intentionality, that's kind of like what that looks like. When we feel like speaking up is just about saying the first thing or being the first person to share. These are just some of the small examples. I'd love to know which one you want us to zoom in on a little bit more.
Yeah, actually, no, I love what you said about not having assumptions. And making norms explicit. I think that's where most teams that we've worked with before, um, are not intentional about it, because you don't think that these small things are actually making a difference, like the ripple effect of that. And we've seen it with teams who are not, like, who are senior, like at the leadership team level, where just
Yeah,
by sitting down and talking about how decisions are made, how meetings are held, how information is shared, like those small behaviors that we don't sometimes really think that it's gonna create this feeling of inclusions actually do, and that leads to a lot of impact on the work. You touched upon it before about, like, what does that help improve in terms of performance, and we don't
yeah.
say it enough that all the psych safety domains are actually contributing to the team working better together, and that leading to better business performance.
Mhm.
And the cost of not having people feel included can be high in terms of, am I sharing ideas? Am I contributing meaningfully? Am I performing at my best? Like, all of these can lead to maybe a drop in the business performance,
Mhm.
and really having the intentionality about making those explicit can improve the team dynamics so much and in so little times, because sometimes once something is spoken and people are aware of it, then it becomes easier to actually make sure that we are practicing it. I love the examples that you gave about, like, being explicit about how we want to run the meeting, sending the agenda before, like that also gives people um, like the heads up to come prepared to share and are invited to share. And on that, maybe we can talk, like, there's something we've discussed before, but like how we in our personality sometimes are more, let's say, comfortable with sharing than others. So between being an introvert or an extrovert, like we talk about this concept in a lot of our webinars. And
Yeah.
how does this relate to psych safety? I remember I was in a psych safety workshop, and people asked, like, if I am an introvert, I'm reluctant to share even though psych safety is high. So how does that work? And at the
Mhm.
time, we explained that the psych safety is a team measure, and it's not a measure of who I am as a person. It's how I see this team, like being receptive to new ideas, being welcoming of people, being included. So if I'm a leader and I have this situation, like I have different personalities on my team, whether it's an introvert or an extrovert or like a louder voice than the other, how do I manage this in order to protect the inclusion and diversity of the team?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. I'm gonna answer that question at three levels. I think the first one is looking at introverts and extroverts to say that some people think to talk. That's more of an introverted characteristic, and some people talk to think. And I think you and I are beautiful sides of that spectrum where I like to talk to think out loud, and I invite people to. And I say this a lot. I say, I'm just thinking out loud here. And some people really need some, alone time to think before they're ready to come contribute. Introverts and extroverts also recharge in different ways, right? So extroverts fuel off the energy of others. So I love the morning stand up because I get to feed off of everyone's energy. And some people actually need a minute to recharge in the morning before they're ready to come to a group setting or a team setting. And being aware of these differences on your team is maybe the first thing a leader can do. And this can be in the onboarding as you get to know each other, playing a round of cosmic conversations, like really just getting to know our colleagues as three-dimensional humans to understand their tendencies and their nuances. And that matters for the second level that I want to explore, which is a use case. So let's take ideation. We often think about brainstorms, and we've seen this happen where we get to a brainstorm, and today we're going to brainstorm the next Ramadan campaign. Okay, great. Your extroverts, the loudest voices in the room, they're the ones who can jump in and share immediately. They can come and they can talk about whatever comes to mind in a fleeting moment. And often what happens is first we see groupthink where everybody just says, yeah, that's a great idea. Because, like we don't want to come into conflict sometimes. The second thing that happens is if we just show up to that brainstorm and we don't manage inclusion, we're not intentional about creating a sense of belonging, we won't hear from the introverts. So one really practical thing we can do as leaders is we can send the topic and the questions for the brainstorm in advance. We see this, for example, with a person on our team. If we come together for a teaming moment and we're answering these prompts, she's like, I need a minute, guys. I need to think about this. And it's fair. So a simple email, 24 hours, 40 hours before that says, hi, guys, in our brainstorm, we're going to be unpacking the Ramadan campaign. Here are some of the key questions that we want to answer or ask ourselves. That just allows for us to show up to that room at equal footing. If the extroverts want to dismiss the email and show up, great, they can. But we've given an opportunity for those who are a little less likely to share so impromptu some time to think about and collect their thoughts. And I bring in ideation because actually psych safety is the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas or questions. And ideation is one of those moments where you want to belong, you want to feel accepted and respected by your team. And if we just show up and share ideas, we might not have time to think of arguments or justification or do research or feel like our suggestions are rooted in something that I'm willing to defend. And also, the teams that have inclusion that is well managed, actually they are 75% faster at bringing new products to market. So that means that their ideation sessions, the fact that they can come up and originate with new ideas, happens at a faster rate when we consider the different, preferences or the different the breakup of our team, right? So that's just an example that I wanted to walk us through specifically for introverts and extroverts because it's the one that we see so visibly in a room. And you can almost feel the sense of assimilation happening when we're not careful about making space for people who need to think to talk.
Totally. And you're actually just touching upon that. And Sabah is asking about the indicators that inclusion is weak. But maybe before we answer her question, I would like to add that there's a lot of facilitation techniques that can be used in brainstorming sessions or in other meetings in order to make sure that all voices are heard. I think I saw Hadid write that in the comment. Sometimes we go by alphabetical order, sometimes to make sure that no one speaks before. Sometimes there's other techniques. There's one I love where, let's say as a leader, what you can do is actually say that you are gonna speak the last one. So inviting everyone to share before you do, because maybe you want to avoid that people will just comply and align to what you said. Other techniques could be maybe explicitly inviting people who didn't speak yet in the meeting to come and give their opinion. Another technique that I particularly like is asking explicitly who thinks that this is not going to work, or who disagrees, or who has something to add about this specific topic. So prompting people to actually voice disagreement, voice different opinions in order to invite challenging opinions. That also, I guess, works usually when we really want to include all voices in the team. So
Maybe
yeah,
I
a
can
lot of yeah.
sorry. Yeah. I was just going to add within the training and the capability building context, some of the more practical things we do is just like you're saying, we kind of agree to those norms where we say, we are going to ask for diverging perspectives. We welcome those. We also start a lot of our learning programs with the mindsets that we want to adopt, just so that we can create like a shared understanding of what type of space we're here for. in learning spaces, for example, I, as the trainer, I'm not as much facilitating as I am teaching. And therefore, it might be me who actually comes up with a diverging perspective to challenge someone. So within the context of learning, it looks different within the context of ideation. And like you're saying, in the day to day and the rituals, there's all these different things that we can do across each of these contexts. The role for us as leaders is to then be mindful about what space we're entering. Is this a learning environment? Okay, how do I make this learning environment one where people feel like they can share openly? What do I need to do to set the scene versus an ideation session versus the daily stand up, a strategy readout? Like just really being mindful as a leader to be prepared before you walk into that space to think about what do I need to do to make sure I hear from everyone, or what role will I play versus what role will everyone else need to play. These are just the really tangible
Yeah,
things we do in all these contexts, right?
I love that. Like a 2 minute reset before
Yeah.
entering every meeting and being intentional about how you show up. Love that. So to go back to Sabah question, so if inclusion and diversity is low in a team, what are behaviors that could give you an early signal?
Yeah. I think there's a few. I'll share some, and please feel free to also share a few that you see. One of them is, I think when we're overly polite, it signals that maybe
Mm,
we have like low levels of candor, and then maybe we're really unable to diverge, and we disagree in a very high context way. And actually, like in the Middle East, like some of our cultures are very conflict averse, so it doesn't come naturally for us to say, "I disagree with you," and to have that. And I think that's a sign, because if we're having a lot of agreement, we're seeing assimilation, right? That concept again, where actually we have a high sense of belonging, but low value for diversity. And therefore, as a team, we're not reaping the benefits of our diversity. I come from a different background. Let's say I come from a different industry. If I feel like I can't share my perspective with, and I'm too afraid to come into conflict, then I'm just going to follow what everyone else is doing. And I've missed out on creating even more value, right? So another one that kind of relates to that is then this team would take less risks. They would just kind of stay on the safe side of things. They wouldn't necessarily be, um, challenging things, or a lot of times I also say, like, if we all look at the leader to see their reaction, in a
yeah,
meeting when someone says something,
yeah,
you're like, okay, great. Sometimes it's part of the entertainment when we see, but it's like, no, it's all good. Like we're here to openly share our thoughts, to disagree on things. And maybe what I would say is like when silence is uneven, like when you see moments like where people are just regularly like me, the person in the room who would be happy to talk the most, and those voices just continue to dominate. And when especially more junior members don't get the chance to speak up, right? So um some people are the consistent ones who share, some people are the consistent ones who don't. I think silence is one of those things where we haven't thought about how to engage everybody, how to make sure we hear from everybody's voices. But I'd love to know if you see anything else, like what else comes to mind for
yeah,
you.
totally. Like a lot of what you said, like we've seen with a lot of teams. Maybe I would add a different dimension, which is the social life at work and the
Yeah.
personal connection. I feel if you observe that there's some people who are not included in, I don't know, team outings, and like they don't feel connected. You don't see that people are actually sitting together at breaks, etc. Like that can also indicate like some people feeling excluded or not connected, or like they don't really feel close to the people they work with. And we know how much like friendship at work is important. So yeah, that could be also an indicator, and we can easily observe that if we are a bit
Yeah.
like within those circles with a team.
I love that example, and I want to share something we recently ran in a training on this domain of psych safety. We actually we love to design these like engaging activities, and so we gave this particular cohort a brief that said someone on your team has become disengaged, right? And her best friend at work has left, and so she's been quieter, and language again is a barrier, and everything is dismissed that she says. So you see her detracting, and we actually had teams develop a 6-week re-inclusion plan, because it's really great when someone's onboarding journey onto a team we have the lunches, we go to the dinners, we welcome them, but then over time things can happen. And so how do we re-engage someone who's been there? And it was a beautiful activity because it actually helped those leaders think about, oh, like I don't have the novelty that I can ride the wave of, right? It's not like this person is new. I have to make them fall back in love with the purpose of our team and help us feel connected. And everyone is like, we would just go up to them and ask them what was wrong. And our response was, and what do you think that they would then say? Like, would they really be open if they've been disengaged for a few months? And it was just really, really great conversations around how we as managers can be attuned to those indicators that Sabah is asking about.
Yeah.
And one more, if I may just add, is I just think teams that have low levels of feedback are typically
Yeah.
those that, or if feedback is a one-way street. Like, if I don't feel like I can give feedback to my manager, like it's then likely that we have lower levels of inclusion and diversity, because feedback is just so essential to feeling like I can grow and share and speak up without being punished and being ostracized by my manager for sharing that. So, um, yeah, I just wanted to add those two examples because I think they're really important as well.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, it makes me think of when you said like being more intentional in re-engaging some people, because sometimes when at work, so let's say we went through a crisis, there was layoffs, or maybe more regularly we onboard new people, and like automatically new people, like they need a minute to feel included, they need a minute to feel comfortable enough to actually voice new ideas or challenge existing ways of working. And the way we want to do it is, as you said, being extra intentional with them, like small practices, like introducing them to the team, inviting them to lunch on the first day, inviting them to provide feedback, let's say 1 week in or 1 month in. I love this practice where you ask new joiners to write down their observations about the team after, let's say, a few weeks of joining. Like all of these give the signal that you want them to feel included, and they want them to really feel part of the team from day one. I also remember, it made me remember when I came back from maternity leave in my previous job. Like it was the first, like my firstborn. And I really, for a few weeks, I felt excluded because few weeks had passed. Things happened at the office I wasn't aware of. New groups may be formed. And also, I was not able to do the same things that I used to do before, like going out after work directly. And I started feeling excluded from all these outings that the team was organizing. So like few things that, like situations at work that can push someone to feel that they're not included, and that will affect their performance. And yeah, like a lot of comments in the chat on. So Hadil asking like, how does that improve performance? Like we talked about it a bit. Like again, like when you are not feeling included, you will refrain from sharing feedback, from coming up with new ideas, from participating in brainstorming, and all of this leads to maybe lower innovation, and that can lead to lower business performance. A lot about like behaviors and being intentional. And what adds complexity to that, you mentioned it very quickly, but maybe we can talk about it a bit more, is the cultural differences, especially
Yes.
here in our region.
Yeah.
You talked about attitude to conflict, but also how we communicate, how we look at the leadership and the hierarchy, etc. It adds a layer of complexity about
Sure.
what are norms that we can implement as a team. So how do leaders or team members can be more aware of these cultural norms in order to make sure that everyone feels included?
Yeah. Great question. So I think like in the region, we see the diversity very evidently because we're such a multicultural, especially in the GCC, workplaces are very multicultural, right? In the UAE, 9 out of 10 of employees are expatriate employees. And in Saudi Arabia, of the total population, around 41% is non-national. And so when you think of that, you're looking at huge levels of cultural diversity. And in the UAE, I know, and in some other parts of the Gulf, you see up to almost 200 nationalities represented. Like they're so diverse. And there's a lot we need to consider as leaders when we first, I would say, just look at your team and kind of remind yourself that like that initial layer of diversity, forgetting gender, age, because we also see now that our workplaces have multi generations in them more than ever before. um, Acquire diversity, so different education backgrounds and systems. If you just look at the first one of cultural diversity, it's something that's quite visible around us. And so then what like we can make a lot of assumptions on that, but what we love to do at Cosmic is we love to root it in what the academic research tells us. And so we often teach leaders about the importance of intercultural competence, so the ability to understand and respect each other across all different cultural barriers. And Erin Myers is the thought leader who's done a lot of work in this space. She wrote a great book, The Culture Map, and her actual tool looks at several dimensions, and her research tells us that actually, yes, in fact, our cultural backgrounds influence how we show up at work. At the level of communication, are we low context or high context? How we make decisions, how we give feedback, our relationship to hierarchy, how we build trust, whether we disagree or not. And also, my favorite one to talk about is our orientation of time. Because this is one that you see so clearly. Like, you have a diverse team, and there's a great TikTok that says the meeting starts at 10:30. Let's see what time everybody shows up. And you could just see some people float in at 10:25, others at 10:37. They're walking in, they're like, hey guys, like, how you doing? And so when we start to see these things, we can then say, great, this is the culture of diversity. We know this about each other. And what is the team norms or traits that we need to kind of make explicit? So on our team, the meeting starts exactly at 10:30 sharp. Or we make decisions. I, as the team lead, make the final decision, but I want to hear from everybody. We make these things explicit at the team level. And in that way, we recognize the cultural differences. And at the same time, we supersede them with the team level norms. And so, just a very simple thing a manager can do is, host a quick 45, 1 hour meeting with the team and say, let's be explicit about how we give feedback, right? Let's be explicit about how we communicate, because the briefing process could be very ambiguous coming from a high context person, or too literal from a low context person. There's no room for creativity. Each side of the spectrum has advantages and strengths and setbacks. It's about how we as leaders kind of define those at the first level. And then I would kind of say that, like, we respond to those norms in very different ways. How they show up is like how I, as a leader, kind of sometimes my voice, or in founder-led organizations, those rhythms dictate, right? But yeah, maybe I'll pause there and see what stands out, or what other questions we want to unpack there.
I love it, especially as you said, in our region, like you have so many different cultures, so many, everyone observes maybe a different a holiday, etc. And we can do a, a lot to make people feel that they are actually welcome to be themselves at work, and
Yes.
to be really like respecting of their traditions and the rituals that they have, but also making sure that that is explicit and that doesn't affect the ways of working. And as much as we can talk about these things, it makes it easier for people to understand and see what other people from where they come from, and make understand that this is behavior is not really personal, like it's the way of their way of being. But that doesn't stop us of having the conversation and telling people, like, the way you give me feedback sometimes make me feel like, I don't know, like I'm not doing a good job, or so. Different ways of communicating, different styles of really being at work can create this kind of friction. And the way we go about it, as you said, like, is being very conscious of these differences and adding rituals that help people get to know each other and get to know these cultural differences. Actually, we did the perfect example to that is what we did yesterday as a team when we did the
Totally.
Ramadan, the prospective, like before Ramadan, inviting people to share how they would love to how would they like to spend this month in terms of time that they want to invest in spending time with their families and prayer, etc. And how can we as a team, whether we observe Ramadan or not, like how can we make sure that everyone has their space and feel respected and feel included by making those explicit and creating this team culture, as you said, where we take this into consideration into how we organize the work, how we set up the meetings, like small things that really can avoid a lot of maybe frustrations or frictions that might happen just because we don't know that what this person is going through and how their day looks like, etc.
100%. And I think, like, to build on that, definitely at the culture, like when it comes to different cultures and ethnic backgrounds, that's a beautiful example. I'd love to also offer another one. I mean, sometimes teams do outings that are very not friendly to those who have kids, right? They'll be like
Totally.
it'll either be later at night or after, and then you'll just think like, but some people have commitments. They either have an elderly parent at home or they have young kids. And I always say, like, with inclusion, it is like a two-way street too. So what I loved about our perspective was like, it was both about how we can ensure all of our colleagues who are observing Ramadan and all of its rituals have what they need to observe the month in its entirety, and also to make sure that those of us who are not don't feel like we're unable to kind of keep our own pace or rhythm in life. And I think it's really important that we look at it across social rituals, team rituals, and also in the way that we like communicate and just our norms of when I'm available versus when I'm not. It's kind of going more into the inclusion space, not so much at the team level, but these are just the norms. And here you have Mariana also saying that she really
Yeah.
believes in the value of a team contract and charter. I also wanted to answer Hadi's question around the value because I have that answer actually. If we're talking about cultural diversity, actually we can see how that cultural diversity contributes to performance, right? So in culturally diverse companies, you can see up to 13% improved financial performance. Um, and in gender diverse companies, even higher, 27% improved financial performance. Plus, they're overall, according to BCG, like 57% more effective in collaboration. So there is great value in building diverse teams. Like it's so clear. The hard part is in the work of leaders to reap the benefits of that diversity and make sure that, like, if we view diversity as everyone having a seat on the table, inclusion is everyone's like invited, right? So like we want to make sure that people feel like they can be invited to share, that they can speak at that table. And it's much easier said than done, but it's all of these small practices leaders need to kind of do in their day to day.
Which is the perfect segue to what I wanted us to talk about next is, as you said, like easier said than done. Also, we get overwhelmed by the day to day, by the speed. Like Leah
Yeah.
asked this question, like if we are under pressure to move fast, how we can make sure that we still protect inclusion and diversity without this slowing us down. For example, so there's a lot of rituals, practices that we can implement at the level of the system to be able that when we, whether we're a leader or a team member, when we feel sometimes like overwhelmed or we prioritize speed over including people, or like we really want to move forward, how do we make sure that we still like include people that needs to be included, and really make sure that we don't miss this in the system, because we know that ultimately that's gonna lead to maybe results that are not as at the level of quality that we want it to be, or that, because we know that the more we include people and the more we discuss things together, the result is better. But sometimes that comes at the expense of speed and delivery, and when we're pressured with time, we choose some shortcuts, but then this might they come back later with negative impact. So how do we do how do we make sure that the systems that we implement, the processes that we have, help us in being able to always have inclusion and diversity as part of the process?
Nice. So there's many things, right? I think as leaders and as a team, we can each play different roles. So let's take as communication. Like as a leader, something I can do is, be mindful of language and avoid using jargon, because then I assume everybody knows what on earth I'm talking about. But if I'm privy to a meeting with leadership and I know what SAP or IMP is, and the team has no idea, they're going to feel like maybe I should know that. Maybe I can't ask, I'll feel dumb, or people will think I'm not smart. And, kind of like you and Hadith said, like having a protocol for how you engage everybody in a team meeting. So saying, I'm going to start with you and I want to go clockwise, or I'm going to, we'll go in alphabetical order. I think as a team also, the responsibility is definitely with the leader to kind of set the pace, but the team can keep it up, right? So what are our meeting protocols? Like, do we all agree that we haven't, like, it'll be like we call out when we haven't heard from someone, right? So maybe you, Marie, will say, we haven't heard from Sabah today. Like, so Sabah, what's your take on this? Someone else is keeping an eye so that we, who, like, the leader is, it's not all on them, right? And then I think also the small one, like rotating roles within a team, like just forces people to kind of, like, a small team internal meeting doesn't always have to be the junior member who takes the notes. Maybe sometimes someone else will facilitate, like, right, and the stand up, like, that gives them a voice. That's at the communication level, and I think, like, when it comes to recognition, that's like a really nice way to show someone that you see what makes them uniquely different. Um, as a leader, we can recognize the contributions of someone that are, driven by their diversity. So Marie, thank you so much for sharing that. Actually, that's your analytical brain in power mode. Like, none of us would have seen that if, but you are an engineer, so therefore you did, right? And I think that helps someone really feel like, oh, my differences are really valued here. And as a team, I think just kind of small things like recognizing someone's expertise. Like, Hadid is really good at impact measurement, and that's her jam. And, she's really great at it. And maybe the last thing I'll say is, when it comes to really creating a sense of belonging, like, as leaders, we can role model by being truly curious, having your one-on-ones, asking people how they're doing, deepening, like, our relationships, like making sure that we're asking those questions out loud. And as a team, kind of like you said, really making sure everyone's own rituals and practices and backgrounds, we can create the space for that. And we're not dismissing them because it's different. We're not saying, well, we have to work long hours and it's, you shouldn't be logging off at 6 to put your kids. Like, this company culture is like that. Well, it's like, okay, I'm happy to come back later, but for this time I need to. So those are a few things at the communication, at the, like, recognition, and at the belonging level. But I'd love to know, like, what are some of the things that you also see that really helps to increase the inclusion and diversity?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, as you said, can be implemented in the ways of doing, and these should not be deprioritized even when we are in a period of, let's say, high stress. So we've seen that that happened to us as well. Like when we are in a, like, couple of months where we are really overwhelmed with maybe work, or like have a bigger load, we tend to deprioritize the one-on-ones. We tend to deprioritize the team time that we spend together, and that on the long term, like, fires back when we notice that people had started feeling disengaged, or had started feeling maybe stressed by a certain situation, and they start to shut down and maybe talk less. And when we are in that sprint to deliver, sometimes we overlook these signs, and that, like, few months later, fires back, and, like, you see
Yeah.
that no, we need to keep something in the system that makes sure that we are taking a pause and making sure that we are not missing those signs. So
Yeah.
maybe we can decide to reduce those times, because it's normal that in some seasons we have less time, let's say, available for more, let's say, relationship building, but that we don't make sure, like, we make sure that they don't disappear completely, and that we still have these check-ins, whether it's once a month at least, or if let's say we're a team who has a lot of rituals together, we see each other a lot, making sure that we still carve time to give feedback to each other about ways of working. I feel that that's very important. And another thing that I've learned working for Cosmic, because most of us are remote, being even more explicit about communication. Sometimes, because we are not in the same room, there are things that we say more explicitly than other teams, and I feel they help a lot. So especially by being extra communicating about availability and time, and saying that, let's say I need you to review this, but I'm very much late on it, and I would really love for you to get your feedback on it before I send it. Just be
Hmm.
aware that on that day I might send it to you in a last minute mode. If you can have a look, I would be grateful. So really being explicit instead of like, especially when we are in a period where we are a bit more busier, to be more
Yeah.
explicit about these small things and giving people heads up as much as possible, can like give the signal that you value their contribution, even though time is short and you will not be able to integrate them, or like have them contribute the way you would want them to, but you still want to have like some form of feedback. So these small things really help to protect this inclusion and diversity, and make people feel heard and valued, um, whether we are busy or not, making sure that these moments are not really completely deprioritized.
Yeah, I would say almost like even especially important when like there's pressure in the system or when we're trying to prioritize efficiency when we have a lot, like the power of just being explicit, the power of making intentional time for these things, or saying we are moving this to this day and ensuring as a leader you stick to that. I love it. It's also like what gives people like a renewed sense of purpose. Like it's what helps them sometimes get through those high pressure times, is like it can feel like the last thing that you need to do right now, but it probably is the thing you need to do most, right? Like to take a minute to create space for the team to have a sense of belonging. I can think of an example when we had our own raise of appreciation session at the beginning or end of last year, and we had so much on. I was like, man, I like I could do a lot in this 1 hour. And actually that 1 hour gave me back so much because doing the raise of appreciation with the team, being recognized, having really great discussions, exercising gratitude for each other, just actually really powered me to be like, wow, I'm actually more ready than I was an hour ago to take on everything else on my plate. Like I think we can tend to dismiss these things, but when we make it part of the system, like you're saying, when the cadence is there, when the role of inclusion isn't solely on the leader, when the team can also champion the rituals that create those states of inclusion and belonging, we allow ourselves to kind of reap the benefits of being in that system, right? So the leader designs it, but then when the team kind of holds it together, it allows us to go back to be re-energized from it. So I really like that point. I'm glad that you brought
But
it up.
actually, you started answering my last question, because
Oh,
I wanted I wanted
sorry.
us to move off about on how we create this change and really embed it in the system, because maybe a lot of it we already do as a team, but being more intentional and explicit about it, and making sure that we add those little changes to, let's say, to how we run meetings or to the cadence that we have, etc. So let's say we decide today, after this conversation, to implement these few changes that we see are valuable for the team. How do we make sure that, as you said, like it's not only carried by the leader, that it's carried by the
Yeah.
team and it's really embedded and people really are aware, and like don't forget about them in times of stress?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, I'm reflecting on our one of our Ready to Lead programs where we had a group of middle managers and we kind of walked away with like, well, what do I do? I have to wear many hats: facilitator, project manager, coach, all of these pieces. And they were like, this is a lot. And I was like, that's a beautiful remark because we are going to talk about what we're going to delegate. One really great way to inspire a sense of collective ownership of team culture is for the leader not to be responsible for it all. One of the managers kind of said, I'm going to make sure that my recognition rituals are managed by someone else. That doesn't mean that I'm not going to recognize anybody. That means the ritual is going to be managed by them. They're responsible for plugging it in. I'm responsible for doing my part too. Um, but when we delegate, actually, we share ownership of the different elements of the system. And I think that's one that we see, middle managers do a lot, is to think they have to do it all. But actually, what if we enabled everyone else to do it? What if the next team time was planned by the team and not by you? And I think that's a really simple way that we can kind of uh, make sure that the system is working. And the next one I would say is just to kind of have these practices like be part of your rhythm, your cadence, like put them in the calendar, adhere to them, stick to them. Like if you're gonna commit to, for example, sharing the brief to a brainstorm in advance, do it, right? Like actually do it, right? And make sure that when you're ideating and you have a rhythm for that, you stick to it. Like the consistency is what builds the habit over time. And I think that, like, with psychological safety, all of these things are what we call the beautiful basics. And so it's just about, the ordinary things done with extraordinary discipline.
Yeah, totally. Could not agree more with that. I think really keep nudging the system and reminding people of this is not the way we do it. This is how we do it. These small
Yeah,
reminders make sure that it starts getting more and more integrated in the way people operate, and then it starts becoming more natural. And we just need to give it a bit more time and not maybe stop at the first failure of the system, like to make sure that we stay consistent. I
100%.
love that.
And to collect feedback from the system, to ask people, kind of going to my point earlier about the role leaders can play is with genuine curiosity, like seek feedback, like ask your teams, like when you have a one-on-one with them, like ask them specific questions about, do they feel like they can speak up? Is there something that I as a leader can do to make it so that you're not afraid to ask, what does this acronym mean in the next meeting? Should we be, documenting, like, the outcomes of our team charter and updating it, maybe, like, these are collecting feedback from the system allows us to know where to nudge it in those ways. And that also means a leader is, again, intentional about creating environments where we have, high levels of psych safety.
Thank you, Tala. Thank you for that. Thank you for joining. Actually, I didn't tell you why I picked you for that domain, because actually I think you're the person on the team who makes me feel included the most, because you are great at remembering every single detail, checking in, asking about me personally, and I think this is actually really important when, as you said, like you make the person feel that you see them in all their dimensions,
Yeah.
and you see more to them than just a colleague who's just helping you finish that task. So I feel that you are high on inclusion and
Thank you.
diversity.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. I do try to practice what I preach. And I mean, I think, like, we are very lucky at Cosmic also because we have such a wonderful culture where we're able to kind of share these things publicly. Public recognition is really great. So thank you so much. And I think you're doing a great job with these webinars. Like, I'm so honored to have been a guest on them. And the Capability Service Line is going to have you on for a webinar too in a few weeks,
Oh my
inshallah. So
God.
we're excited about that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank for all the insights you shared. I hope that this conversation was really valuable to the audience. Thank you for joining, everyone. We loved having you with us on this fifth episode of our webinar series. Thank you for all the questions, all the comments. We hope that we've answered them all. If not, we'll come back to that in the chat later today. Next, we will be diving into more of the domains of psychological safety. We also might have few episodes where we have extra special guests. I'm not gonna announce, so we are gonna have also guest speakers who are like seen as really experts in the domain of psych safety, coming and speaking to us more and more about what are the practices that can help us really make sure that we have high levels of psych safety in the team. If you'd like to go deeper, we have many resources and articles available on our website. I'm sure someone from the team is gonna put the link for you. Also, you can sign up to our newsletter, follow us on all the channels, and keep an eye for the announcement for the next webinar episodes. Thank you again for being with us today. We look forward to learning, growing, and building more psychological safety, safe workplaces in the region. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.